What happens in a room when the person everyone dismisses turns out to be the calmest, most competent soul there? The kind who has stood in dust storms, counted breaths between artillery thumps, and learned the quiet art of not flinching. If you and I are honest, we've both been in spaces where looks arrive before hello. Every time that happens, the whole room becomes a test, not just of the person being watched, but of everyone watching. Saturday afternoon, a Midwest sky the color of a nickel. In a strip plaza between a feed store and a hardware shop, Nyla Carter eased her sedan into a parking space and sat for 3 seconds, hands on the wheel, collecting herself. She wasn't dressed for statements. Navy jeans, a heather gray hoodie, hair folded into a no-nonsense bun. She'd promised herself this errand would be quick. Go in, ask clear questions, handle the paperwork if the fit felt right, and get home before the streetlights peeped on. Her neighborhood had seen 2 break-ins in as many weeks. She wasn't buying a fantasy. She was buying time. Time for police to arrive if anything ever went wrong. When Nyla pushed open the glass door, a bell tinked above her like a tiny alarm that only the room could hear. The shop smelled like gun oil and old pine. Rifles lined one wall like sober sentries. Neatly lit cases displayed handguns like museum pieces. Behind the counter stood a tall man about 50 with a baseball cap and a jaw that could have been carved from the same old pine. He glanced up, and the smirk formed not out of comedy, but out of category. You know that look. We've all seen it. It says, "I've already decided your story." 2 men in camouflage jackets leaned on the glass case near the register. One nudged the other, not bothering to whisper. Think she even knows which end is which? The second chuckled, taking his time with the laugh, letting it bounce off glass and wood. Bet she's here for selfies. Instagram trained, range ready. The clerk didn't shush them. He stroked a microfiber cloth over invisible dust and waited for Nyla to explain herself. I've watched people do this little theater in 100 flavors. The part that stings isn't the joke. It's the brazen assumption that they own the space and you're trespassing. Can I help you with something? The clerk asked at last. His tone wore a uniform, clipped, controlled, a dare tucked inside a favor. Nyla stepped to the counter without bristling. She decided years ago to spend her energy on outcomes, not on every passing insult. I'm looking for something compact, reliable, 9mm, simple controls, clean sights, safe for home storage. I'd like to see options and handle them before I ask to step onto your range. His eyebrows performed an entire monologue. 9mm, huh? That might be a lot of gun for you. I'll be fine. She said it evenly, like a fact about the weather. One of the camo jackets gave a stage whisper. Careful, man, she might show you up. He slapped the counter, delighted by his own humor. The other guy howled a second too loud, the way people do when they want their laughter to substitute for a point. Nyla didn't give them any reaction. Instead, she scanned the case, pausing over a Glock 19, a SIG P365, a Smith & Wesson M&P familiar silhouettes. Familiar balance in memory. I should say here, because some people only hear what they fear, that competence is not menace. It is restraint in a world that sometimes forgets the word. The Glock 19, please, she said. The clerk hesitated a beat, performing reluctance, then lifted it to the mat with 2 hands, muzzle angled safely away, slide locked back. There was at least that. Decent counterside safety. She checked the chamber and magazine well by sight and feel, then eased the slide forward, her finger high on the frame, nowhere near the trigger. The room's sound thinned. It's funny how a clean, practiced motion can smother a joke more effectively than a speech. Not bad, the clerk said, but most folks start smaller. Easier to control. I'm not a beginner. Sure, you shoot before? One of the men leaned in, elbowing his buddy. What's the biggest thing you ever shot, sweetheart? A little .22 at the fair? Nyla set the pistol down gently, as if returning a book she respected. Belt-fed, light machine gun, M249, around 750 rounds a minute. That sort of thing. The laughter collapsed like a tent with its poles yanked. The clerk's smirk faltered. He tried to recover with a chuckle that arrived without conviction. Reading manuals is different than an older customer by the ammo shelf, flannel shirt, winter kind eyes, spoke without heat. Sounds like she knows more than a few folks I've seen walk in here. The clerk shot him a quick, reprimanding glance and then returned to his script. Okay, let's pretend you've done some shooting. What do you need it for? That question always arrives dressed as prudence. Sometimes it's really permission in disguise. Nyla didn't blink. The same reason anyone in this room would give. Safety, security, and because it's my right. I'm happy to talk safe storage and training. That's what I'm here for. The two men near the register shifted, their humor suddenly tasting stale. The clerk polished the counter with renewed vigor, then, as if embarrassed by the silence, tried to restart the old engine. We also carry pepper spray. Might be more your speed, I won't lie. My chest tightened, reading the disrespect thick in there. Not because I didn't trust her poise, she had more poise than the whole case of pistols, but because of the pattern. The repetition numbs you if you let it. The older man in flannel finally turned fully around. Enough, he said. Not loud, not theatrical. Just that one word delivered like the period at the end of a long sentence. The room stilled a notch. The clerk, trying to laugh it off, opened his mouth for a retort. And then the bell over the door chimed again. Heavy boots, not swaggering, deliberate. A man in plain clothes stepped in, carrying the posture of someone who has slept upright in a helicopter and has the patience of a stone. He scanned the room once and walked straight toward Nyla. You could feel the environment recalibrate, the way a compass needle corrects after you pull away the magnet. Sergeant Carter, he said, voice calm but commanding, the way doors close smoothly on ball bearings. Without hesitation, he raised his hand and gave her a crisp salute. The store froze in the middle of its own breath. Here's the thing about recognition. When it is honest, it has the clean weight of truth and the sting of a mirror. People stop blinking because they can see themselves in what they just did. Nala's right hand rose almost involuntarily, muscle memory meeting respect in midair. Her return salute cut a clean line through the stale fog of the room. Commander Grant, she said just above a whisper. Didn't expect to see you here. Commander Elias Grant, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, eyes that missed nothing, let the salute fall and allowed himself the smallest smile. You never expect to bump into family in a hardware aisle either, he said, but here we are. He turned, not dramatically, just decisively, and let his gaze touch each of the faces that had laughed. Sergeant Nyla Carter led a medical evacuation under indirect fire when half of us would have frozen. She dragged 2 wounded soldiers to cover after a vehicle strike and kept a 19-year-old private talking for 18 minutes while we waited for a bird that landed hot and blind. If you're looking for jokes, you won't find them in her story. Even the refrigerator hum in the back seemed to hold its breath. The clerk's mouth opened, then closed. The 2 camo jackets looked at the scuffed toes of their boots as if the scuffs contained scripts they preferred to read. Nyla didn't bask. That wasn't her shape. She stood the way you stand when you've been saluted for something you never did for applause. I'm just here to ask responsible questions and purchase responsibly, she said to nobody in particular, and to everybody. Same standard that should apply to anyone. Grant nodded once, approving the precise emphasis. And if anyone here wants to talk standards, safety, and training, start with hers. He softened, lowering his voice to her. I heard about the break-ins over on Pine Hollow. You living over there now? For the moment. She allowed a small, wry smile. I'd like my mother to sleep without waking at every sound. He glanced at the clerk, who seemed suddenly very interested in aligning a stack of warranty pamphlets. Range open today? The clerk cleared his throat. Yes, sir. We, have a bay free. She's, welcome to exercise the same rights and responsibilities everyone else is welcome to. Grant finished, not unkindly, but with an edge that trimmed a pretense down to truth. He looked to Nyla. You want to step onto the lane and shake off the dust? There was a time when Nyla would have declined just to deny the room any spectacle, but she understood something. I think we all learn the long way. Some demonstrations aren't shows, They are clarifying exercises. They draw a line under a lesson and sign it with steady hands. 10 minutes, she said. Then I'm headed home. The clerk slid a clipboard across the counter like a peace offering. She skimmed the range rules, already known by heart, initialed the safety acknowledgments, and moved toward the hallway with Commander Grant and the flannel-shirted man. Tom, the stitched name on his pocket read, walking 2 respectful paces behind. Inside the range bay, the air tasted of spent powder, but the ventilation hummed well enough. Nyla set the rental Glock on the bench, double-checked clear, then accepted a fresh, in-store magazine preloaded with 10 rounds of range ammunition. She inspected each cartridge as if greeting old colleagues, ran a fingertip over the feed lips, then seated the mag and locked the slide with a motion clean as a metronome. Ear and eye protection on, muzzle discipline that would make an instructor nod. The lane camera, grainy, utilitarian, watched with indifferent eyes. She set her feet in a stance not macho, not delicate, just consistent. When she pressed out, the front sight settled in the rear notch, like a thought sliding into place. She breathed. Trigger prep. A barely audible break. The paper at 7 yards coughed a neat new hole where the 10 ring turned gray. I'll confess, even imagining this, I exhaled tension I didn't realize I'd been holding. It wasn't the hit. It was the insistence that every step be respectful. That matters. She worked a string of 5. Slow as smooth, smooth as fast. No flinch, no bowl of spaghetti for a grouping. Just a nickel-sized cluster where focus met repetition. She paused to scan, shoulders relaxing a hair, then lowered to a high register, finger off the trigger. Reset, breathe, 5 more. The group widened as anyone's would when the heart begins to pound against old memories, but all stayed clean and center. Tom made a soft, appreciative sound behind the glass. Seen worse groups from folks who brag loud, he murmured, not bothering to hide the praise. Commander Grant's approval was wordless. Part pride, part relief, part, I hope the right people are learning the right thing. Nyla cleared the pistol, locked the slide, dropped the magazine, and set both on the bench with care that said, tool, not toy. When she turned, the clerk stood in the doorway with the 2 men, their bluster dismantled and stacked on the floor like lumber that wouldn't be needed after all. Ma'am, the clerk began, voice stumbling over unfamiliar terrain. I owe you an apology. That wasn't how a customer should be treated. That wasn't how a person should be treated. There are a dozen ways to humiliate someone who has just realized they were wrong. Nyla chose none of them. You don't owe me special treatment, she said. You owe everyone respect at the start, not after you fish their resume from your assumptions. You could feel the sentence land, not like a slap, more like a bench finally taking weight it should have borne since morning. The taller camo jacket scratched his jaw. Didn't mean nothing by it. Just messing around. He sounded like he wished the floor would open up and edit the afternoon. Tom turned, not unkind but without a speck of varnish. Son, messing around like that is how you teach yourself to ignore the people who keep you safe. You'd be surprised who you're talking to most days. Commander Grant glanced at the safety posters, his gaze pausing, as if measuring the distance between slogans and habit. Respect is a starting point, he said, almost to himself. Imagine that. The clerk swallowed. If you're serious about a purchase, Ms. Carter, I'll make sure you have every answer you need. Safe storage, training classes, everything. No nonsense. No auditions, Nyla said. Right. His ears reddened. Back at the counter, she compared controls, felt the bite of different grip textures, asked the kind of questions that live 2 layers down from brand pamphlets. Striker feel after 2,000 rounds, sight drift with drop-safe tests, magazine tolerances in cold weather. The clerk answered as best he could and, crucially, said, I don't know when he didn't, instead of inventing confidence. That, in its small way, is also respect. She chose the Glock with simple steel sights, not because of a logo, but because she knew how it behaved when the adrenaline clock ran fast. She asked about a safe with a quiet, glove-friendly keypad and a tamper alert. She signed where the law asked her to sign. Paperwork is not an insult when the rules apply to everyone. Tom slid a small box of range ammo onto the counter and nudged it forward. "On me," he said, "for the next time you decide you're in the mood to teach without raising your voice." Nyla smiled with her eyes more than her mouth. "Thank you." Commander Grant stood easy but watchful, like the day itself had relaxed a fraction now that it had witnessed a correction. He offered his hand. "You keep standing tall, Sergeant. People like me sleep better for knowing people like you live next door." She shook his hand. "Only thing I plan on firing tonight is my kettle." That got the first honest laugh of the afternoon. When she finally pushed back through the glass door, the bell's ring sounded different, still small but not condescending. Outside, the late light brushed the parking lot in warm strokes, turning the asphalt into a kind of quiet river. Nyla breathed it in, closed her eyes for exactly one count, and then headed to her car. She didn't pump a fist. She didn't rehearse a speech. She just felt the truth settle. You cannot control the story in other people's heads, but you can refuse to live inside it. If this were merely a tale of a salute, it would be neat and forgettable. But the aftermath, what we do after we've been corrected, decides whether a moment turns into a change. I'm convinced that's where most stories actually live, in the unfilmed minutes after the big scene. The clerk stood a long time after Nyla left, cloth in hand, polishing a counter that didn't need it. At some point, he put the cloth down and looked at the two men who had laughed loudest. "We're not doing that again," he said. Not a grand apology. Those can be performance too. Just a decision out loud. One of the men shrugged, embarrassed into stubbornness. "We were just—" "Yeah," the clerk said, not cruel. "I know what we were just." That's the problem. He pulled a training flyer from under the register. "Range basics refresher, Saturday at 9. You two come in and we'll start with respect and work our way up." Maybe they showed. Maybe they didn't. Change isn't tidy, and I won't lie to you for the sake of a clean bow. But I will tell you that the flannel-shirted man, Tom, started bringing coffee for the shop's morning class on weekends, and that the commander sent a laminated sheet the next week labeled "Range Etiquette and Respect is Safety," with a note that read, "Post this where the jokes start." As for Nyla, she drove home to a house that looked the way hard work looks when it finally has a front porch. Her mother, Janine, had the evening news turned low and a pot of collard greens sighing on the stove. "You take longer than the DMV," Janine teased, then saw her daughter's face and set down the wooden spoon. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Nyla said, and for once the word wasn't camouflage. She placed the locked case on the table the way you set down a sleeping child. Gentle, watchful. They were the kind of men who believe rooms are theirs until they meet a reason to grow. Janine blew out a short whistle. "You make poetry out of foolishness. You eat yet?" "Soon." Nyla leaned in the doorway and told the story simply, not to relive it, but to file it in the family ledger of days when dignity met friction and held. They ate, they laughed about Tom and his quiet enough, they clucked at the clerk's awkwardness, and then the evening settled into the honest fatigue of ordinary safety. Later, alone at the kitchen table, Nyla scribbled a list. Range sessions once a month, review of safe storage with Mom, neighborhood meeting about lighting on the back alley, a check-in with the community policing officer who actually returned calls. This, too, is what responsibility looks like. Not swagger, but systems. And because life insists on plucking the same string until it learns a song, the next week brought an echo. At a community center open house, a young woman in scrubs approached Nyla, twisting a hair tie around her wrist. "Miss Carter? You don't know me. I was in the shop last month when some guy laughed at me for asking about a safety course. I left. I shouldn't have. I heard what happened with you. I signed up for the next class." Nyla felt that precise warmth, the kind that isn't pride so much as relief. "I'll see you there," she said. "We'll ask too many questions together. Here's my take, and I'll stake my name on it. The measure of a moment like that Saturday isn't whether the room gasped when the commander saluted. It's whether the room remembered when no one important was watching. It's whether two men in camo say "ma'am" next time without sarcasm, and whether a clerk learns that "I don't know" builds more trust than a smirk. It's whether a community center fills a class with people who were told they didn't belong in that room and show up anyway. Weeks later, Commander Grant crossed paths with Nyla again at a farmer's market, where the tomatoes tasted like July no matter the month. He carried a canvas bag and a look of someone who had learned to be ordinary on purpose, even after years of being saluted. "How's your mother?" he asked. "Sleeping better." We got motion lights and the neighborhood started a text thread that only talks about real issues, not rumors. He nodded like that was the most elite operation he'd heard about all year. "You ever think about teaching a fundamentals class?" People might hear it differently from you. "I think about it," she said. "I also think about a world where respect at the counter is so normal that no one needs a class to feel welcome." "Both," he said. "We can do both." They parted with the easy grace of people who had stood in the same storm. Across the market, a kid tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed toward a booth selling lemonade. Ordinary life kept throwing its bright little coins in the air and catching them again. A show far better than any spectacle in a strip mall room. If you're still with me, here is the note I'd write to you on the back of your hand if I could. Don't wait for salutes and titles and shiny stories to tell you who deserves respect. Start there, in every room, with every person. It costs you nothing and returns the kind of interest that compounds in the dark, in the quiet, when no one is clapping. The strongest among us don't walk in trying to prove anything. They walk in trying to get something good and ordinary done, like letting a mother sleep through the night. And if you ever find yourself polishing a counter that doesn't need polishing because a truth just shook your day, good, let it. Make one decision out loud. Post one laminated sheet where the jokes used to start. Show up at one class you used to mock. That's how rooms change. Not by theatrics, but by new defaults. Nyla Carter didn't ask to become a lesson. She asked for a fair exchange. She paid twice over, long before Saturday, once overseas, once with years of swallowing other people's smallness. The least the world can do now is return the favor at the door. Ring the bell, say welcome, and mean it. If this story met you at the right time, carry it forward. Not as outrage, but as practice. Say hello before you measure. Assume competence before you perform the smirk. And when someone walks in wearing a simple hoodie and a quiet bun, remember, you might be standing in front of the person you'll be proud to salute one day, even if the only salute they want is the silent kind you give with your eyes, which says, "You belong here."